call the meeting for August 10th, 2020 to order at 5:17 p.m. with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Agenda item number 2 is the consent agenda. Are there any items that members would like set aside?
Oh, it's different. It's not.
If there's no objection, the consent agenda will be adopted. We vote on this, I always forget. No? Okay. Oh,
I think because we have Tanya on Zoom, we have to.
I know we have to do roll call votes because we have a member on Zoom, but do we have to vote on something we wouldn't normally vote on?
You would
Yeah.
probably want to, just to be safe, under the digital guidelines.
Okay. We'll do a vote on the consent agenda. Representative 1, Ward 1?
Yes.
2,
Yes.
3,
Yes.
4,
Yes.
5,
Yes.
6,
Yes.
7,
Yes.
at large, yes, and city council rep.
Yes. Thank you.
It's unanimous. Agenda item number 3, be the public input. Members of the public may address the school committee for up to 3 minutes on non-agenda items now or on agenda items later. Comments that pertain to staff, personal matters, or a student issue should be directed to the superintendent or the appropriate staff member of Lewiston Public Schools. Public comment shall be directed to the school committee and be brief, not repetitive, and related to the matter at hand. Before starting, please state your name and address. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak on non-agenda items? Oh, so will he come and tell if there's anyone in there that wants to speak? Yeah. If there's anyone in the overflow room, can you see if there's anyone in there that would like to speak?
Madam Chair?
Yes?
While this is happening, are there any folks joining us via Zoom for the record?
Are you able to check on
Tanya was the only.
In terms of participant,
Public
public
participants?
members? Are we able to check on that?
that? Dave, are there any public participants that are, that want to participate?
No, this is, we are doing a regular Zoom streaming session, not a webinar. We're doing a regular Zoom meeting, so Tanya's coming in for a regular Zoom meeting, but people from the public are not coming into that Zoom meeting.
And are we monitoring the public comment email to see if there's anyone that sends anything in that way? Okay. Dave, you have access to that?
I can get us access to that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And just as a reminder, that's part of that technology that Dave's already been working on getting quotes that we can incorporate all of those items. We just don't have it yet. It's being worked on.
We're good, no one in the overflow room? Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 4, to receive and approve a proposed reopening plan for September 2020. This will be presented by Superintendent Liles.
So to set the stage, obviously we are in very challenging times. And weeks back, various members of our Lewiston Public Schools in general worked closely and read through the guidelines that were available by the state of Maine. And the guidelines in the state framework, they put some, say, restrictions upon us with the goal of opening schools safely. Some of those guidelines state things like 6 feet of spacing. Students have to wear masks. There's language in there about 3 feet of spacing. There were proposals in conversations with the Maine Department of Education, working closely with the Maine CDC, about following these guidelines to ensure that from a transportation, nutrition, education perspective, that we had to be mindful of our student enrollment size and how we monitor and maintain those spacing in those guidelines so that we can return to school safely. At least that's what the guidelines were intended to say. And so when we looked at that from a leadership perspective, We looked at the different options that were available. The state of Maine shared a number of what they call modalities with us. And some of those modalities were remote, some of them were hybrid. And what we know as a community, because of our enrollment size, we have too large of a student body to be able to put all of our students in a building at one time. And so what we looked at doing for options, again with the guidelines, was monitoring, getting feedback from parents. Would you send your kids to school using a hybrid model? And so we started to gather that data. We looked at a proposal that split our enrollment in half. And by half, we did A and B. And so we have cohorts that started to carve themselves out. And we proposed these at our last school committee meeting and shared some information sessions with the public, did a Q&A forum with both staff and community in multiple languages for our community using Lexikey. And we continue to get survey data back, and we have results up to today. I got to be honest with you. I was honest with you last time. There are a lot of challenges in any kind of programming in the world of COVID-19. And we look at things like, as of this afternoon, about 65 teachers that would need either an accommodation or leave and would reasonably qualify for that because of various conditions that exist for them. In addition, our operations team's working hard to follow up with close to 100, I believe, other personnel who have expressed a concern, and we're still in the process of following up. And so we have a staffing question. Do we have adequate staff? And so we follow that, or kind of at the same time trying to figure out how many parents want to send their kids to school. And that survey was not without some conflict, because I think people felt some pressure. Why do I have to decide this by August 9th? And I understand and appreciate that pressure. We didn't intend to impose pressure upon people. But to organize and plan for students being in school, if that proposal is adopted, we have to be able to monitor that so that we follow the guidelines and be both within the law and, again, doing schools as safely as we can. Some of the data that's come out of that, we are, Sue Williams across the room can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but we ended up in total around 76%, or just over 76% of families saying, I would like to send my kids to school. And the remaining 23% roughly, 24%, it was a mixed number, that they would keep their children home. I also know from my chair, because I see notifications from the state of Maine, that we have a number of families who have made the decision to homeschool this year and not do remote or hybrid with Lewiston Public Schools. I think that was to be expected, but it doesn't resolve all of the other issues we have. The state, and I'm not going to point a finger at them, I think they've worked through a very tough process, has given us a lot of guidelines, but we still have some questions that we have. One of the things that we have, just presenting some challenges, we received a number of devices from the state of Maine to be distributed to students. And what we found is those devices don't allow for a management system that's within our reach, and those devices can't actually go to students without it being against the law, because there's no filter, which means students could access anything in the world. And we have lots of agreements, and also I think we want to take a high road on that, but a lot of our agreements and legal restrictions flat out state you can't give a computer to a kid from a public school without certain conditions being met. And these devices don't meet those conditions. I know the state's looking at that, and our local representatives have assisted in writing a letter to the state to say, hey, this isn't working. So in addition to that, our IT department has worked hard to try to secure more devices, so if we are remote or we are hybrid, we can put devices in the hands of our kids. And we found out that once the budget was passed, we're looking at a shortfall of supply. This is worldwide. It's not just us. Every school is trying to get computers so they can provide kids with that access point. And so when we found out that the devices and the related equipment to go with it would be weeks and weeks away, we have another challenge there. We got some guidance about transportation, and that guidance included limitations right now that are the same as classrooms, where you're looking at kids being approximately 6 feet away from each other. The only people that could sit in the same seat would be siblings, so someone from the same home. Other than that, it's one student per seat, again, unless it's siblings. In addition to that, some of the guidelines that came out had some contradictions that made it challenging, including putting up shields for drivers, but there's a question about whether or not that's safe for the driver to be able to get out and navigate an emergency situation. There was conversations in the guidelines that students would have to use hand sanitizer getting on and getting off the bus. And then the state fire marshal chimed in and said, that's a flammable, you really can't do that. And so when I say the state's worked hard, I really do give them a lot of credit because we have a lot of guidelines that are helping us do this work. But these guidelines really tie our hands with what we can do. And one of the biggest things, the biggest challenges we have, is if you look in this room behind me and around me to my side, you see a lot of people wearing red representing our Teachers Association. We haven't been able to give them what they need to do the work they need to do to be ready to do whatever we decide really well. And that's their goal. And so we have a number of challenges. I'm sure I've missed a few, and I'll bring them up in conversation. I don't want to repeat the whole presentation, but we have some real challenges. And this is a tough decision. I don't envy any of the school board members who have to really think this stuff through. When we consider the safety of our kids and the feasibility of the logistics, we have some real challenges ahead of us. So with that, I would entertain any questions that anyone has.
School committee, like to go first. Ms. Wright?
So Superintendent Inglis, just a couple of questions that I've been thinking of throughout this whole discussion. So in terms of the devices, were we able to achieve one-to-one devices from March to June when we went unexpectedly remote?
Almost. So we were able to get devices into the hands of students who we could locate, who we could get the devices to. To do that, we had to systematically pull, or IT did, every device out of every nook, out of every school, and get devices out. Now, the downfall to that is in that effort, which I think was a good one, I think it was an honorable effort, a number of devices went out without cases, without bags to be put in. A number of them got damaged. We have a number of them that were not yet returned, and part of that process is we've had staff go to kids' houses, knock on the door and say, hey, we need to collect that device. So we have some devices still out. We had a number of devices get damaged, and even still, we were encouraging, but because of the time of year, we really, I say this carefully, we didn't require kids to engage. We wanted them to. I think now we're looking at the start of year. We really want kids to be engaged. We did then, but obviously the times were so different. So we need hundreds more devices, and they're on order, and they have been on order for weeks. The challenge is getting them here with, again, cases in the back so that we can have them to use and get them back. The other thing I would note is the ability for them to be managed, which I brought up with the state-provided devices, but it's a real challenge for us. We cannot buy a machine off the shelf and give it to a student who can look up anything they'd like. It has to have filtering ability.
Can I follow up as well? So a second question that just as we look at data, just trying to understand more of the scope of it, how many responses would we have expected? I see 5,400 here, but is that, where are we missing from that? The 20% who didn't respond, is there any pattern there that we can point to at this point? Are those our neediest students? That sort of question.
I think one of them, just to answer your question, I think access is a big one.
Okay.
Whether or not students or their families have access to the internet. I think it's always hard in the summer. I actually think these survey results are quite powerful. I think our team did a great job getting them. Just to get at almost 80% of students is a phenomenal return. But I think that also speaks to our community that they care about education. And so I think the challenges were access. I really do. You know, do you have the device that can do it? Are you fully aware? We did provide language services along with the survey, which I think were very helpful to a lot of families. But I really think my short answer, I guess, is just access. And students and parents follow through. We made it available in a number of different ways. So.
Thank you.
Any other committee members?
Can I just add real quick, Member Ray, that I also think, just from personal experience, that there's a correlation between the students or the families who did not fill out the survey who will want to send their kids to school. So I think that missing chunk of data are families that are more likely to say, to send their kids to school. That's not scientific, it's just what I think from experience.
Your anecdotal experience. Okay, thanks. Ms. Hawkins?
So I just had a really quick, so looking at some of these, the results, and looking at the percentages saying they want their kids to go back to school, depending on, you know, which school, whether it's primary school, middle school, or high school, are the numbers feasible looking at the hybrid option? Are we going to have the space, and is that even possible?
Because of the high percentage of return, this is a great question, and I just want to explain that. When we pitched the AB model, it allowed for 4 days of in-person instruction during the school day. Thank you. 4 days of instruction during the school day, school week, with Wednesdays available for remote, SEL, a number of other things. And the way we looked at it from a planning perspective was, let's say hypothetically, 50% of families say, I'm keeping my kid home. Well, we could have then looked at, okay, we can have the other 50% of kids come to school full time. They could come Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. We could even have talked about the Wednesday. But because we have such a high return on people who want to send their kids to school, my concern is now about, are the 4 days enough? 2 cohorts enough to spread people out? And I think they are. Our leadership is pretty talented at figuring these things out. But we're going to be pushing that bubble. And I think the inverse to that is staffing. And so I think when our staff is whole and healthy and COVID doesn't exist, absolutely, no question. But when people need to be remote because they have legitimate health concerns and items that are preventing them from being at work, we start to wonder about how many spaces can we now supervise as we spread kids out and maintain. And so a real challenge for us.
Thank you, that's exactly what I was looking for.
And I think, to be honest, whatever comes out of tonight or in a decision soon will have a direct impact on our next data set. Because I think there are a lot of people watching this on YouTube right now saying, okay, if they decide that we're going to be hybrid, I can make a phone call to HR tomorrow morning because I didn't know what was going to happen, so I didn't want to say something that I didn't need to.
Mr. Coppin?
Jake, I think I might be oversimplifying this, but you mentioned a number of teachers who are looking at taking leave and not being able to make it in for their own concerns. Are these teachers that could be designed at home to actually teach the online learning from their locations and actually have them available and involved? And this way, you know, the people who are not comfortable being in the school can have a connection and maybe involve more with that.
So I just to answer this clearly, I don't think it's about comfort. I think it's about, you know, real restrictions. And HR works with people on that. How can we support you? How can we accommodate you? But we have people that have very real concerns that will prevent them from coming into work. We do have the ability to telework, I guess is a term that we've used, where people could remote in, and they might be assigned to, say, a cohort of kids who are choosing to not be in school. What I'm worried about is the balance. If we have more kids, more families saying, I'm sending my kids to school, then we have staff that can supervise. I might have to bring another conversation back to the committee about how do we do this effectively. So there's a delicate balance. But we could, some of the staff who need accommodation could work from home. Some of them will not be. Depends on their schedule.
The second question is, of the parents that decided that they wanted to reply on the survey to send their kids back, do we have the ability to maybe take a second look at them and see if we could reduce that number coming in on remote and expand the remote learning piece for parents that don't have a financial hardship or there's a reason that their child has to come to school? Do we have the ability to maybe dive in a little more detail and see if there isn't a group of the population that we could keep more at home on remote, just to make our numbers a little bit more manageable in the schools?
So So I would say that over the summer, we made a commitment and worked from a base of parents would have some choices. I think if we go that route, that becomes the school deciding. We don't have that data. We could ask folks who say they want to send their kids to school, we could ask them if they would choose remote because of just capacity concerns. But I just feel I would rather look at a different hybrid model. And I hate to even say that because I want kids 5 days a week as much as possible if we can do it safely. But we'd have to look at another hybrid model if we have too big of a number, in my opinion, because I don't think it would be right for us to say to a family, well, we think you can handle it financially, so we're going to leave your kids home. It creates too much of a divide in my mind. I do think we could re-ask the question and say, hey, look, the numbers are high, so anyone out there who would take remote, they were on the bubble, it's okay for your family to do that. Short of that, it would be school choice. And but from an equity perspective, I just think that would be a really tough conversation.
I have a question.
Yes, Tanya? Ms.
In the survey, I didn't see it, I didn't fill it out, but did we ask parents if they had their own laptops or computers?
So with a goal of being a one-to-one district, we didn't ask that specific question, but we do have a number of families who do not take electronics from the school department because they have their own.
So that might be a question that we need to know if we were to even, go back to school at all. Even if we were to go 2 days a week, 3 days a week, whatever it might be, there still has to be that remote learning. So if we're saying we don't have laptops for everybody, that seems to be an issue for the days they're not in school.
Yeah, so our teaching and learning department has already been looking at that, and so not all remote learning has to exist on a screen. And so part of what we're looking at already, and Karen, I don't know if you want to add to this, part of what we're looking at already is what are those engaging activities that we have discovered and found good success with over the summer that we can mimic or grow, at least to get the school year started, if we start at those dates and the machines are not fully available yet. I've seen different images and heard different stories from students, even over the last month, of how engaged they were with the very different learning that was made available to them. So if you want to add to that.
I'll just answer the question. We did ask that question in our spring survey about laptop, but who had a device at home and who did not. And that goes to your question about the middle school and high school. We were much closer to one-to-one. Elementary school, we worked with families to provide at least the family with a device. In some situations, we were able to give more than one device to a family. And that would be our plan moving into the school year, is to follow a similar rollout. And of course, as soon as devices came in, we would deploy those. Superintendent Langlis is correct. We have been working on some different ideas in terms of what does that look like if devices are not available, as well as what other options would we want to offer to our students as it relates to that remote learning. I think the word remote sometimes holds that connotation of it's always going to be on a computer or on a device, and that isn't necessarily true. Our summer programming, as Jake mentioned, did allow for kids in multiple schools to participate in summer programs without having a device, and successfully. So those are models that I feel like we have kind of piloted and we're able to build upon in that remote way.
Can I see anyone else first? Yeah, of course. Anyone who hasn't spoken yet, are you interested in?
I don't know if you're going to talk about this later. Are you going to talk more about the cleaning safety piece, or should I?
Yeah, I can chime in on that. Maybe you can ask a follow-up if you want. And so there's 2 Connex boxes out in the parking lot. I don't know if you saw them as you pulled in. Those are full of the state shipment of PPEs that came in, masks, shields, all the right term, I want to say aprons, gowns, some gloves, things of that nature. So we still have some more things on the way, but those two containers are, as our facilities director, Mr. Gross said, essentially full. So that gets us started. We have more supplies readily available to be ordered, and we've checked with our vendors who have said that we can get those. So we know we have the ability to restock our stock. So we have PPEs on site. We've also looked into, but you want to chime in? Probably easier if you would.
Yeah, I can add a little bit. We also have plexiglass screens that we've got on order through Geiger, 660 of them, so every classroom will have one. So those are coming in. We've got all of the medical equipment. We've ordered that from thermometers to gowns. We have the full suits that people can wear for our custodial and maintenance staff to keep them protected. We have the plastic face shields. We have the face masks that are plastic so that you can see people talking. So in classrooms, that'll become really important. We've got quite a list. We feel really good about what we have. And I should talk about sanitization and disinfectant. No problem at all as far as having all of the chemicals that we need to be able to do that work. They're all approved. They're all on the approved list. We've got all of the equipment to be able to go in and spray things down. Our facility staff is taking a training class and getting certified to be able to do that. Yeah, we're in good shape.
So the follow-up question would be, I happened to visit a couple of schools last week and asked a couple of questions, and one of the things that was kind of outstanding, kind of got to me was the janitorial staff was it was very slim. One school said they had 3, another school said they had 4. The building administrator admitted that the janitorial staff is very, very slim. But is there any solution to kind of solving those kind of issues with regards to that?
There is. We actually have contacted with we're trying to contract with our temp agency and we're looking at hiring temporary custodial staff, a few HR folks to help out. We're looking at substitutes, getting additional subs in. Let's see, med techs. We're looking at getting some med techs in. So we hope to be able to secure some staff that way as well. We do, you're right. And what they're reporting to is correct. We are short on custodial, and we've been that way for quite some time.
And kind of a follow-up to that, I mean, obviously, middle school and high school, I heard that the switching classes would be very slim. How do you, in terms of that transition, is one group going to go into another group that's already been in that classroom? And if they are, how's the sanitary process going to, how's that sanitary process is going to go in that classroom?
So the state guidelines require students to hand sanitize as they enter the building. There's a protocol for self-screening. We're looking at some equipment. Josh is actually behind you. Josh, if you want to chime in at any point, please do. We're looking at some screening devices. Don't know if we can secure them and get them installed by the start date, but these would scan for temperature as people walk in. We've got 2 different vendors, and we're looking for a third to try to make a decision on that. Not to get lost in the weeds, but anything federal funding, we need at least 3 quotes. Those are costly items. And so we're looking at that for entry. Students come in with their mask. They are required to hand sanitize and/or wash their hands as they come in the building. Once they're in the building, as they move around spaces, we're going to look to stagger spaces, but that goal is not about whether or not you can reuse a room for different people. It's about not having 100 kids in the hallway at one time. So trying to be smart about those spaces. We don't have to, according to the guidelines, sanitize between that shift. So if I'm in English class in the high school and the bell rings and I leave that space and I go to another space, the guidelines don't require you to fully sanitize that space in between the classes. So you can move that way. We just want to be smart about the size of the rooms. And then if something pops up, we are actually building protocols, not completed yet, still waiting for some more guidance, for sanitizing spaces. If someone is showing symptoms, and this could pop up at any point in time. Okay, so 9:15, if the student's sitting in the classroom and thinking, geez, I feel kind of hot, and I'm not feeling so good, and so we're going to have students be able to see the nurse. We also have a dedicated room near the nurse's office as close as we can for students to be sent to, and that room is an isolation space. And the goal with that would be to make sure we can get that student home to their family to be assessed further. That's why I've already brought up the med tech, because the nurse can't be in two places at once, and that's for staff and for students. And so we're building out those programs.
As far as the mask protocol, where are you guys, like in the process?
Yeah, so mask protocol is everyone has to wear a mask, and the only shortage of that is if you have a medical condition in which we have shields. And from the state guidance language, it's the mask first, the shield, and that's even got some questions behind it, or you can't be in the building. And that's the line that we have to maintain connected to the guidance. Now with the mask, especially the littles, we're going to have to look at having what we call mask breaks. And that, on a nice day, it's easy to go outside, get space, be at least 6 feet away from each other, take your mask off. That's considered a break. But what a mask break isn't is going out on the playground and running around with your mask on. And so that's not an option. So we have to build those into the schedule. One thing that we've had to talk about, and no decisions have been made, it's just been light conversation. But we have some spaces in our buildings that get quite hot. Numerous places, not so much this building because it has air conditioning, but if you go to the top floor of the middle school, the top floor of the high school, or some of our other older buildings, it can get very, very hot in those spaces. And if you have to wear a mask much of the day, except when you take your breaks, we're going to have to get into that conversation of, if we have a really hot spell, we might have to, if we have a hybrid model, we might have to say, no school this day. It's a conversation I didn't think we'd ever actually get there, even though I've lived some of those hot days. But when we talk about working conditions for our staff, and what we're asking kids to do, and stay focused and 6 feet apart, if a room is 92, 93, 94 degrees, which is not unheard of in some of our buildings, that's a real concern.
And a follow-up to that is, and I know from talking to various teachers, actually in the region, I mean, they already have a hard time just keeping the kids' cell phones away during class time. But is it, and I think for the teachers' conference, it's going to be one of these things that there's going to be very hardcore enforcement that, if you're fooling around, defying, being obstinate, not having your mask on and things along those lines, there's going to be hardcore enforcement to say, hey, maybe this hybrid model, if we choose this, that is not going to be for you because you can't go along with the guidelines that are being outlined in this plan.
I think we have a responsibility as a district to be committed to the safety of not just our kids, but also our staff. And I think the community, so when kids come into a space, if they're not following the protocols, who knows how that could move around, and then everybody goes home, and that spreads potentially elsewhere. And so I'm going to talk with some of our administrative team and have that conversation of, do we need a new policy? And I went and looked at policy, and I said, we have policy that says that we will maintain all the health and wellness expectations by the state, federal government, all of that. And so I believe we have policy. And I'd like to think that there's teachable moments, and hopefully kids will have a quick turnaround, but if those teachable moments are, if someone requires too many teachable moments without, just cause, then I think that it's self-selection, I guess, that they may need to be remote. But we can't continue to put people at risk for students who just choose to, not.
I just want to say, having been a former school bus driver, I'm glad that's on your radar, because sometimes it's hard enough to get them to sit down in the first place. But the key to controlling your school bus, in my case, is having those guidelines, having the kids know what they are, and know what their consequences will be. So I'm glad it's at least on the radar, because it's a possibility.
And I think that's going to land at a building level, administrative discretion, because every one of those cases will be unique in itself as to why and how frequent and what those things are. but they'll have the support of our commitment that we're going to maintain the safe environment.
Mr. Dan?
I know that there's a concern about whether or not we would have adequate staff to support the cohorts that we've established. I guess one of my questions is, we know that there are areas in some of the buildings, particularly like you said, the third floor in some places, and we know there's an area at the high school that really shouldn't be used. Do we have a handle on how many actual physical spaces would be appropriately available so that we would be able to maybe more balance the educators, the number of educators with the number of appropriate spaces?
Point of privilege, could you repeat that louder?
There are spaces within the existing buildings that we know are already not really conducive to a healthy environment. And the question was whether or not we could, where there's a potential for being short-staffed, is there also a potential for being short-spaced to actually meet all of the requirements of, even 50% of the students? We know that some of the older buildings in particular just are, you can't use all the spaces. Some of the spaces we were using already were not very conducive, and this has changed all of those rules. So I'm just wondering, if we have a good sense of how many available spaces we have, as well as how many educators we have to put in those spaces.
So I think it's a two-part answer. And one, I'll go back to Zach. So one of the things we looked at when we first started considering different ways of going with education was, what other spaces might we be able to use? Can we rent a facility? Can we do this? Can we do that? And the reality is, we still have as many teachers as we have. So if we seek to use other spaces, maybe the gym, maybe the CAF, maybe the multi-purpose room, things like that for classrooms and doing other activities elsewhere, we just have to make sure we have the staff to do that. So we can create an abundance of room, but we still need, educational leaders to do their work and supervise. So that's the first part. Second part is, Bobby, I don't know if you want to go through the ops walkthrough component that Josh has done with the different buildings and the spaces, or?
So as far as I can describe them, and I can describe what some of the issues are, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I think just some of the concerns from
I can do that. So to just elaborate off on what you were talking about, Bruce, and I'm going to say something that you already know. You just didn't say it. We have some of our spaces are being utilized, closets have been transformed into classrooms because we're at capacity. That's not really the best space to put staff or students into. What compounds that primarily is ventilation, and having proper ventilation in each one of our buildings. So we have to be it's my recommendation that we're very cognizant about ventilation and what that looks like in each one of our buildings. In that example about a closet space being transformed into a classroom, there is no ventilation. There is no window. There is no exchange of air, healthy exchange of air. It's recycled air. And we have to be very cognizant about what we talk about when we talk about recycled air versus an exchange of air. That's pretty much it.
As a follow-up to that, I guess that one of my concerns is there likely are some of the buildings, this one in particular, that can easily meet some of those standards. But some of the buildings that are more challenged, let's say, or some of the areas that are more challenged, we really don't have any metrics to test where we're at with that. The testing can be done, but it takes time. And right now, every school district in the state is trying to figure some of this out. So even the testing agencies are all backed up. So I would be concerned about some of the spaces that we already know are not really very good. just eliminating those out of hand to start with until we could get some measurement or some metric to say, yeah, actually it's better than we thought, or actually it's worse than we thought, so that one's out. And I don't think we've had the opportunity to do any of that data collection yet because nobody knew what the model was going to look like. And I think that, you know, I would be concerned about that. Particularly, I think, at the middle school and the high school. I think those are two of the really challenged buildings. I think the newer elementary schools are probably, for the little kids, I think we're probably in better shape because the buildings are quite a bit newer, other potentially maybe than Montello, but even that's had a significant amount of work done to it. So, but the middle school and the high school, I think, will probably be the bigger challenge.
So some of the challenges are things like mechanical systems and airflow. The language and the guidelines are adequate. And so there's no metric, there's no quantitative metric for so-called adequate. But I don't think we want to put people in bad situations either. So there's a balance to what is adequate, because before COVID, while the spaces, it might not have had a window and it might not have had great circulation, but it had enough. That was before COVID. And now that we're living with COVID, there's that question of how do you define adequate? And so far, to my knowledge, adequate hasn't been defined. There's lots of recommendations, you know, to increase it and to move the air. There's also debates around that. And so, again, I don't want to get lost in this, but we have good ventilation here that goes up. So that's probably the most adequate. In spaces where you don't have what you feel like is adequate, they say put a fan in the window. Well, if you're sitting by this window and the fan's blowing out, anything that happens here is going right by you. And so you put the fan over there. What we can't do is put the fan in the window that points up, because we don't have that in our buildings. And so mechanically, there's definitely some challenges with what spaces can and really shouldn't be used. And I don't know if the facilities director wants to chime in on this or not, but I know that we've already looked at a couple of spaces that we've said, you know what, we really shouldn't be using that, given the times.
So Josh, can you just talk to the board about the protocol that you're putting in place as far as filters are concerned and increasing air?
Everybody hear me okay? So yeah, what we're doing right now, or what we've been doing, I should say, is going through and assessing buildings by taking a look to make sure they have ceiling diffusers, a supply and return, to identify spaces that are actually moving air. And as Jake said, there's no numbers. They're not asking for certain air changes an hour. They're not asking for a certain amount of air per person. They're basically just saying maximize the outside air as best you can. So for us at this point, just like you said, our newer schools, we have the capacity and the ability to increase the ventilation air rates, like I do for this room and next door when we have meetings and when students and staff are on site. Some of the other buildings that are older either have equipment that is no longer operating, or equipment that was designed at a very inferior standard compared to today, but the state guidelines just say that those have to be working adequately. So again, right now what we're looking at is what's working, what's not, what has ventilation air, what does not. And we're putting big red X's as we meet with the different administrators to identify those spaces that do not have any ventilation, either via a ducted system, or if there's a specific unit ventilator in a classroom that is not working. We are identifying those spaces at this time as well. When you talk about the middle school, most of the equipment there is running. We have yet to identify a system that is not operational currently. At the high school, the biggest areas of impact are places in the basement, as well as the multi-purpose room and the cafeteria. All of those ventilators are currently inoperable. There's been presentations to boards, to previous boards about replacing those systems. That hasn't happened as of yet. So to kind of run through the schools, you pretty much hit the nail on the head. High school's pretty bad, middle school's pretty good, Montello's probably average. The other schools seem to be doing okay. But there are those spaces where a storage room has been turned into a usable space, and not every time is facilities aware that happened in the past, both myself and my predecessors. So that's why we're taking the time to meet with building administrators to walk their building entirely and identify those spaces with those administrators to let them know where they're at, what the good spaces are and what the bad spaces are.
Are you going to a higher level of filtration to Josh?
We are looking at that with our mechanical contractor. Anything that's newer typically has adequate filtration. The problem is the older buildings, the big three that you just said, their air handling equipment do not have the horsepower required to overcome the additional loss of that thicker filter. So basically, the higher the number on the rating on the filter, the tighter it gets and the smaller the particle it grabs. But that makes it even harder to push the air through it. So what ends up happening is if you put the right filtration in, you don't move the air. So right now, we're sacrificing filtration to maximize the amount of air that we're putting out. And where possible, we are changing the filters to increase or decrease the size of particle that they can grab when the air moves over them. And we've increased filter changes, going from 2 per year to 3 per year. We've had an additional change at this time.
So when is, like, I guess all that work going to be, like, completed? I guess it's always ongoing, but when is it kind of like?
I'm hoping to have every building assessed by the end of the week. Siemens is our mechanical contractor. They are working behind the scenes. They've been going for about a week and a half, primarily working on the Dingley building to start with, and then they are assessing each school. Another idea that we are attempting to implement either before school or just shortly after it opens is to change the ventilation systems in the nurses station and in the quarantine room. We are looking to cap the exhaust air. So like those two grills up there, if we were going to make this the quarantine room, we would cap those grills off so we could still supply air to the room, and then we'll install an exhaust fan to suck all of the air out of that room so it's not put back into the space and then shared with the other people common on this air handler. So that's another thing that we're looking at doing, again with the intent that we have that up and running as close to the start of school as possible. But again, a lot of these guidelines came out pretty late, so as soon as they came out, we got Siemens in. They're doing their homework right now for us.
Just a quick follow-up. So I guess worst case scenario, if there's a snag in the projects, what are we looking at for a timeline? Just ballpark, because that'll be exact.
Honestly, I can't even guarantee that we're going to have it done. I wouldn't be able to guarantee. Once we get the fans in, each fan shouldn't take us any more than a day or two to install. We have an electrician on site. We have to get permitting through the city, pull the electrical permit, get it approved, and then basically we're either running a short amount of distance and going through the sidewall with the exhaust or going up through the roof. So we're at the mercy of contractors depending on who we need in each space, and we're still coordinating with our building administrators where those quarantine rooms are going to be.
Mr. Madrid.
So Superintendent Linus, I wanted to ask what I think perhaps is the most salient question to a lot of folks. Do we have any public health modeling to indicate if we go forward with the proposed reopening plan, how many students, how many staff members might contract COVID-19, and then obviously extrapolating out from that, how many may end up hospitalized, how many may end up dead? Do we have any kind of modeling to indicate that, or do we just not? We don't. So,
I don't have any modeling for Lewiston Public Schools specifically.
Okay. Okay, so it would be fair to say then that that we really have no idea whether or how many people, based on the level of precautions that are being proposed, might contract this disease, might become seriously ill with this disease, might die of this disease as a consequence of reopening.
I don't know that. Yeah.
Okay.
Ms. Wright? Thank you. So one question that's just kind of been floating in the back of my head, especially raised by Member Potvins' points, was does a hybrid model threaten to violate free, appropriate public education at all? That was a big concern when we moved to remote, and so I'm curious how it factors into this future planning.
So we live in an interesting spot as a district, and so FAPE is the district's responsibility. It is not the state's responsibility. And so I actually asked this question in a forum. I think Sister Paquette was with me when I asked the question, because if you follow their guidelines and you go with a hybrid modality that they shared as a way in which you might choose to do this, you'll have certain complications. Of those, you have free and appropriate public education rights. And we look at kids with 504s, IEPs, remote, hybrid, all of that. Especially in IEPs, there's language written into these about how many minutes a particular student should be exposed or have access to certain kinds of specialized instruction. It can vary upon subject and what have you, depending on the identified disability. And so there's teachers in the room, and they'll tell you right now that from an IEP perspective, if I see my kids twice a week, that's going to be very difficult because my kids need probably more than 5 days a week that they've already been working so hard to meet the level of need. And then you get into that conundrum of, from FAPE perspective, this has been approved now all over the place by many different school districts, state guidelines, what have you. This is not just a Lewiston concern. And so I kind of went around in a circle, but my real answer is, yeah, we're responsible to ensure that students have what they should have. But all the guidelines, because of COVID and the pandemic, are going to make it next to impossible, and in many cases for our kids, impossible to meet their IEPs. It just will. And I want to be real about that. We're asking teachers in any kind of pandemic model, remote or in person, to meet the needs of students that you can't meet unless you are with them, especially our severely disabled. You can't meet their needs remotely over computer.
This leads me to another question, if I may. Chair Parks, our staff versus our contractors. I believe, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, that we have some folks who come into our schools and provide some services, perhaps BHPs, perhaps OTs, maybe more. What are we doing with those contracts as of this moment, and what's the plan moving forward either way?
So contracted services can be dynamic because there are a number of ways that you can work to provide teleservices. Like for example, we've been doing telespeech in some of our different levels for several years now. So that service is probably able to continue as long as we can structure it well. A lot of our services are provided by district employees. And I know last spring that they worked to continue to provide those services, so those aren't contracted out. I think the contracted piece is once we know our direction, we'll have to assess the feasibility of them and try to figure out, how do we do it. So if we have a hybrid model, we might be able to do it in-house if that student is in-house. We could have a hybrid model and have the student choose remote and have to figure out how that looks. And so I think we have to balance all of those things because we do sign contracts and we do issue funds for those things. But the inverse side to that is we can also not choose as a district to not provide the services established by an IEP or 504. So all of them.
Okay. And Mike, sorry, I keep adding on. Do we also contract nursing services from outside vendor?
So from a nurses services perspective, so we hire our nurses, they're in district staff. We do have a small pool of nurse subs. I emphasize a small pool. I know that LRTC will contract some things with nurses, but that's about their students and clinical work. And I know that last spring, they worked really hard, Director Callahan and his team, to find ways for students to continue their learning in the CNA field in ways that were safe for them. And so I think that might be one area where we have some of that. And then what we've looked at, because of the isolation rooms and the potential volume for our own nurses who are on staff, that we want to make sure they have the protection they need and the support they need. We've had our HRs reaching out to temp agencies and things of that nature to see if there are CNAs or med techs that are out there that could help us. And we could use some of the federal dollars for COVID relief to compensate them.
Thank you very much.
I have,
Okay.
sorry, go, no, you go ahead. I'll wait till
We
the
just had a follow-up question from Member Easton. So for Cohort D, how's the selection being picked as far as need goes? I got an email from a parent, kid has a 504 plan, and they were inquiring. It sounds like from what I'm being told that the kid, in terms of her need, would need to be in school. So how does that selection process go?
So our special ed department is still working on some of those pieces in that we don't have a decision yet to say, okay, this is what it's going to look like to make those determinations. So it's kind of cart and horse conversations, but we know that we have kids that have a level of need that accessing school remotely is next to impossible for them. These are students that include functional life skills. So these are students with severe disabilities who can grow their life skills, can be active members of our society, who can lead a healthy, wonderful life as they develop those skills. But they won't be able to log onto a computer to develop those skills, most of them. We have other populations like our newcomer students or our foundations level students for language learning. It's very difficult to acquire language using a computer remotely. And so that's another population of students that we're looking at. And then another, and I may be missing some, and then another is how do we ensure students have access to programming like LRTC, where they go into their vocational programming and they have requirements for their programming, but that's because they're doing things like live work. You can't wire a house or frame a house watching YouTube videos and trying to, and that hands-on piece is just such a valuable learning tool that was one of those cohort Ds because those students could continue to access that programming. And we've looked at a model at the high school where it's called a 4x4 schedule, so instead of rotating blue and white, it's just blue days, which would lighten some of the preps for teachers, but also students who have that programming, they would go to that programming daily, but only for a semester instead of the year.
I can just add a little bit. I can share that the cohort D work, Pam Emery is texting me as we speak to make sure I have the information. Administration is working with the special ed department to identify that special population of students who would need that as Jake described. I think it's also important to note that that cohort, while we'd love to be able to offer that to everybody, as Jake talked about, the number of students in a building, it doesn't feel good to have to say, sorry, your child is a 504, so we're not going to be able to offer cohort D, which is why we're trying to set some parameters around it's these programs with these students with this level of need. And every school, there are schools that may not have a cohort D based on the programming that they have in their building.
And what is the, obviously, these protocols are still, work in progress, but what are some of the, in terms of the kid gets sick, or if it's at school, and also too, and we've all seen it, and, as part of being on the school system, as far as, mom and dad have to go to work, so they give the kid medicine, next thing you know, the fever's gone, and then all of a sudden it spikes back up at 11 o'clock in the morning. What are some of those protocols look like?
Yeah, so that's the plan around the isolation room. And so that students who are showing symptoms that align to COVID, and we're going to have to teach our kids this, but part of it, if we have students in the building, they're going to have to be taught these things repeatedly and with reminders. And so if they have those symptoms and staff are picking up on them, or even a staff could be showing symptoms because they thought it was allergies, and it's kind of seeming like too much, so they want to make sure they keep the environment safe. They would go to that isolation space, and we will have a communication plan. Again, needs to be built by building because the isolation room could be different for each building and how we staff that. So, but my answer to you leads me into another kind of vein in this conversation that I really think we need to have. That no matter what decision is made, and again, I don't envy the position that we're in, we have a lot of things that still need some more time. We need the end of the guidelines from the state of Maine. We need to figure out that protocol. We need to figure out the isolation. We need to figure out, busing and transportation. We need to know how many staff, once we adopt the model, will actually be able to come to work. So our building leaders can start to strategize how they're going to do this. And so teachers can prepare, how are we going to do this? Look, our teachers are committed to this, but they're going to need some time to pull this off. Whether we go remote, hybrid, or plan C that we haven't talked about yet, I would be advocating for, and I mentioned this last meeting, delaying student start. And I know it's the next agenda item, but as we get closer and closer to those dates, I would be pitching for more time without students in the building to ensure facilities has time, to ensure teachers have time, to ensure that we have all the mechanisms in place that we need to get more computers in, to build those items that won't be computer specific because the computers are in. Teachers need time, and we have a lot of unanswered questions. And it's to no fault of the people in the room who are doing the hard work of our district. But the timelines of these things, bad example, if you're planning a wedding, you don't do it a couple weeks in advance. You have phases, you have things you get done and that you're ready to do. And in all fairness, I would be making a plug for our entire school district, and I know this can be a hardship on parents, that if we go hybrid or remote or Plan C, that we allow our professionals time to do the work they need to do this as well as we can. We've never done anything like this before.
Before I do any more comments, I'm seeing that there's a lot of conversation on the YouTube channel, and I just wanted to remind anyone that is watching through the YouTube channel that if you have specific questions or comments, you can send them to public comment. Sorry, give me 1 second. LPS public comments.org. That's not an email address though.
LPS public comments at lewistonpublicschools.org.
Okay, all right. Are you on mic so they hear you say that?
I can say it again.
Okay.
If anybody would like to post some comments on our comment email, it's LPS public comments with an S at lewistonpublicschools.org.
Thank you. And I also received an email stating that people who are, I'm guessing, watching remotely, I don't fully understand it, are waiting to be added. Is there some place that people need to be added to a room, or are they just probably waiting for the opportunity to speak?
They may be waiting for the opportunity to speak.
And there isn't an opportunity for people watching remotely to speak?
Not remoting yet, because they basically have to come in person to speak.
Okay, so anybody who's watching remotely, if they want a comment read or acknowledged, they'll have to send it to that email address?
That's correct.
Okay, just wanted to clarify all of that. Thank you. Somebody over here raised their hand. Mr. Poppin.
Jake, what kind of, as you talk about that schedule, that timing, what kind of flexibility is the state offering us in terms of the 180-day requirement, first? And second, we have a lot of things that are up in the air that we don't even have an idea of the timeline. What would your recommendation be coming in at in terms of a couple of weeks, a month? We'll wait till the state gets their act together? What's your
Is
recommendation?
this part of the next agenda item or?
I don't know, I brought it up. I can
Okay,
answer
go
it
ahead.
quickly, I guess, and I can go into this deeper for the next agenda item. The state has to grant a waiver for you to reduce the number of student days. So by calendar year, by law, students in Maine go to school for 175 days. Our teacher contract is 182 days. And so what happens is, if the state gives a waiver like they did last spring, you don't have to count your snow days. If you go remote because you had to close, it's okay because it's not in session. Those kinds of things. And there's a lot of us in our superintendent's groups conversations talking about how, boy, it'd be nice to have a waiver so we know that we can adequately prepare. The state has not issued a waiver. So the gamble, if you will, I don't know of a better term, if we take more days from students initially so that teachers have the time to do the work they need to do, the time that they need to get ready, we end up in this gamble of, if they never waive days this year, which is possible, then we get to the end of the year and our teachers have worked their entire contract, and we know how hard they work, and kids still have 5 days of school left on paper. And I think it's a conversation that we can continue in the next agenda item, but I think it's an important one to have. But until we have the waiver, those days on paper need to be made up.
Could they be made up remotely at the end of the year?
That's my hope for snow days. The problem is they only count it by day. So I'd still need someone to help facilitate the remote something.
Which would be another day at work for a teacher.
Correct. It'd be another day.
Are IEPs being reviewed to determine which students who have IEPs absolutely could not do remote learning?
Yes, so that's part of the conversation with special ed supervisors and building admin, both with the cohort D that we were talking about, as well as what needs do each individual student have, and once we know what plan we're going with, then we'll know how we're going to meet those needs. I don't think lots of IEPs need to be necessarily changed. We just may need to change the delivery model depending on which plan we go with.
And then are they also being reviewed for students who have IEPs for learning accommodations that also may have health concerns, which they can't learn both remotely, but being in person would be a risk to their health? Is that?
Yes.
Okay. It's all being broken down and determined. And what would happen in that situation? Are there any proposed options?
I think it would be a case by case. I would hate to give an example because I wouldn't want anybody to hang their hat on it, but I think it would be case by case and certainly something that special ed department and the schools would work through to figure out how we're going to do that.
And I had a question that I think has been touched on a couple times, but I just wanted to clarify. So if there are X amount of teachers who would prefer to work remotely, and X amount of students who would prefer to work remotely, and then teachers who are okay with coming back in person, and students who want to be back in person, how much of an overlap is there with that, or how much is missing? How much of a gap is there, if that's what the case is? And then also, do we have enough subs that could fill that gap one way or the other, or is it just too far in one direction or the other that that's not doable?
Wow. I can address the sub question that you have pretty easily. So we have a sub project going on right now. Our HR team contacted every single one of our subs and did a survey to find out who, much like the rest of our staff, to find out who was comfortable coming back. So we have that information. Then for the folks that aren't comfortable coming back, we put them over here in this category, and then we've got what's remaining. Jake wanted us to work on getting at least 4 permanent subs, building subs. So that's the project, and I think it's a great idea. So that we're trying to get at least 4 building-based subs per schoolhouse, so that those folks can be utilized in whatever capacity that the building administrator needs, and they are consistent. They're on-site consistently. Then we have over here, once we get through our building-based subs, then we have over here what I call assignment-based subs. And so they just go in and they pick up an assignment here and there. We're working on getting technology set up in each main office so that the subs would have access to a device. And then we're also working right now on coming up with a training protocol for our building-based subs, where we may need to use them in a virtual capacity. And so Karen and I had a discussion today. We've started that, tossing around ideas. I had talked about having some teachers maybe do some videos to help train some of our subs. Karen already has access to a suite of the platforms that we're going to use. There's a suite of training videos already available to us, so that's great. We'll utilize those for our subs as well. As far as the gap between, I don't know if I quite understand your question. You talk about the gap between coverage,
Right.
yeah.
Enough teachers to cover the students in both of those categories.
Yep. So the information is still unknown. We're still getting information based on our cohorts. And so once we have a better understanding of what our cohort is going to look like, and then what our staffing is going to look like, then we'll be able to determine. We don't know what that looks like quite yet. I know that staffing, today's the 10th. We're updating it every single week. We make phone calls all week long, and then we update it and we send it out on Mondays. So we just did it today. And I don't care, and you can speak to cohorts. I don't know what the timing is of that.
So the cohorts are being developed based on the responses initially that we got from the form and the survey that we asked families to fill out. And then in conjunction with that information, knowing who would want hybrid and who would want remote, separating those students apart, and then working with transportation to determine which kids make the most sense from their perspective, and then also making sure that we have a balance of students in our classrooms and in our schools, so that we're not intentionally pulling one population in on one day and another population in on another day. So that work, principals have been doing that slowly as that information has come in, which is why it has been so important, and there's been such a push to get families to help us with that, to give us that information so that we can get those cohorts developed.
Just the add of the unknown, right? So to mix what both of them said, if we walked out of here tonight and would say, hypothetically, if that passed, we could see an influx of people reaching out tomorrow, as I said earlier, because they want to support their kids and they're not quick to release their personal information to HR to get the accommodation that they need. But once a decision is made, it may shift things.
As of right now, I wrote down the percentage of parents who've responded saying that they would prefer the hybrid model. What's it, 74% or 76%?
It's up to, as of today, 79.9% of responses.
So if that percentage of our students were to return to school, do we have bus capacity for that with the limitations in place?
Can I just use it? The other thing we did ask families about was their transportation, whether they would need transportation or they would be choosing to bring transport their child themselves. So that information is being compiled, but you can speak to capacity of buses.
So as far as capacity of buses, first of all, we have to have enough bus drivers to be able to drive the buses. Currently, we're down as of today 8 drivers. The break-even point, not break-even point, but actually I'll say the nuclear point is 12. If we do not have 12 drivers, we cannot, if we're down 12 drivers, we cannot fully transport our students.
In a normal model or in this model?
In a normal model. So now we need to apply that to this model. And so once we get the cohort together and we understand how many students are actually going to be in person, then we'll apply it to that model. So right now it's down 8. That's with 3 very critical people driving the bus, their mechanic, and their manager and assistant manager. That's probably not the best idea, but they can drive. They can drive if we need them. So again, we can't answer that question 100% this evening because we don't have all of the information. But given what we think the guidelines are, we can probably fit about 24 kids on a bus. And in working with administration, building administrators, we've got a pretty good thing going, pretty good plan.
I have one more question. How have we improved remote learning from March until now?
So we learned a lot, obviously, in March. We learned some of the systems that we were using weren't as authentic as we wanted them to be. Of course, I lived some of that as a high school principal, so I had a lot of reflections of my own. We've also, I think, grown our capacity with how we want to go about this process to make sure they're authentic. Karen, I don't know if you want to mention some of the various programs that we are looking to adopt that align well to other systems we're using.
So I think the biggest thing that I can speak to is it goes to the state guidelines and what is required. We are required to offer what's considered live instruction, and that doesn't mean person to person. That means having a contact with a person each day, as well as having a schedule for kids to follow, and certain checkpoints along the way in order to make sure that they are meeting the standards that we are responsible for, and so on and so forth. In the spring, there was less of that structure and less of that expectation. That's not an option for us in the fall. We are expected by the state to meet those things. So knowing that, we have taken feedback that students and teachers and parents have gave us in the spring, used that information, and we've made some decisions about learning platforms, and I spoke about this, I think, at the last meeting. For grades 5 through 12, we'll be using Google Classroom as a consistent platform for students to have access to and to communicate through. And at the pre-K 4 level, we'll be using a program called Seesaw, which is very similar. It's a user-friendly or primary-friendly version, I would say, similar to Google Classroom. That will allow families to know where to go, where to get the information, for students to get that information, assignments to be collected, so on and so forth.
I think it looks like we lost Ms. Whitlow.
Yes, you did.
I'll have to watch for her to try to get back on, keep an eye on it.
Okay,
I'll
thank
bet her
you.
in when she's ready.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. So I mean, I think that I could go on and on, but we definitely have learned a lot from the spring, and we've, it even goes back to what we were talking about in terms of what does remote learning look like. You know, providing materials and providing opportunities for kids that go beyond the screen is a huge one that we have done some work with this summer, and we know that we can continue in only with the funds that we're being given from the CARES Act and the COVID relief funds. So we definitely learned a lot, as Jake said.
Can you touch base on the what class size is actually going to look like as the hybrid model is adopted? I know from school to school it's going to vary, but can you just kind of touch along those lines?
So in a perfect world, not knowing who is on site for staff yet, not knowing how many families will choose to attend in full, the thinking of the hybrid piece is that about half of your class would be with you Monday, Tuesday, and about half Thursday, Friday, cohorts A and B. The other courses that are typically more specialized in cohort D, you may have more of that class or all of that class, but we still have to figure out, do you have the space for your students and your staff to socially distance? So, for example, in some of the more supported classrooms, you have more adults who provide that support, like a functional life skills or students who have other disabilities. Those spaces, we have to then figure those in the school. Do we have room or space in this classroom to have all of these pieces? And so those are some of the things that we're looking at. Do we add space? Do we split the group? Those are all conversations that once we have a model adopted, we're going to have to do the very best within the parameters of that to make it work.
We'll do one last with Ms. Ray and then open it up to the public.
Sounds great. Thank you, especially to the public, for waiting through these questions, because I think this conversation is so complex. So just extrapolating from what we've heard here tonight, there is a world in which we vote on a hybrid model, and tomorrow you find out, and I'm sorry for ninth grade teachers, but that's the example I'm thinking of, we have no ninth grade teachers. And then we would have to solve for that problem backwards. Is there another opportunity, or what would it look like if we have to switch gears? Will you seek school committee approval in that case? And similarly, the state is updating their assessment every 2 weeks. Does that come back to us every 2 weeks? Not just that emergent situation, but evaluative.
So there'll be some things that we won't have the time to do. For example, for a school committee gathering, unless we do emergency meetings on Saturdays, because the color sequence or indication model, those are being issued on Fridays. I don't know if we'll have heads up from anybody, CDC or DOE otherwise. If I might get a phone call a couple days in advance saying, hey, look, things are indicating a certain way, and certainly I would share that with you all if I receive that information as I can appropriately. But if we get news on Friday that our county is red, we'll be remote on Monday. There's no wiggle room with the state or the guidelines, so that is, I think, part of your question. The other side to that, whether we talk about excessive heat days or snow days, I think I can perform that function. I would like to talk about heat days just to get to that place, but I think that's a function of my role. From the planning backwards perspective, we're going to be in some interesting choices in decision making. We, as a group, if the school committee wants that to be a decision of the board. I'm not opposed to that, but we may find things that are time sensitive enough that we can't do that. For example, something popped up at Connors, and we have, 25 teachers out, planning on being out tomorrow. On top of the people are already remote because of, a flu that's going around that may or may not be anything to do with COVID. But if we have a staffing ratio that gets so dynamic that it's not appropriate to have kids in school, I would almost treat it like, I'm full of terrible examples tonight, I'm sorry. But like when we have like a water main issue, and we just say, hey, look, we had that at McMahon office last year before. McMahon is closed today. It might be tomorrow too, because we gotta figure this out. We may have to look at longer cycles of more pocketed closures if that pops up. But I guess part of this framework, I think once we decide how we're going to move forward with this, that's when I want to take this back to the association, the administrative team, and say, okay, what are some of these contingencies we need to be thinking of, so I can share that back with all of you. Say, do you want this to be discretion of me? Do you want a phone call on a Saturday afternoon if this pops up? How do you want to go about this? Because it's going to be a very active, potentially, I don't use the word imminent, but it's going to be an active need our response in a hurry type situation. And unless we're going to have emergency meetings, it may have to come to discretion with some guidelines that we could establish here.
How are we facilitating public comment? Are everybody supposed to go up to the mic?
Through that email.
No, I mean people that are actually physically here.
They can go walk around to the podium?
One at a time, I'm assuming. We'll open it up for public. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
I noticed when Josh was speaking that it didn't amplify within here. Is that not possible, or?
I can't hear what you're saying.
Sorry, and it's kind of what I was talking about. When Josh was speaking, it wasn't playing through any speakers or anything else like that. I'm just worried about our soft-spoken.
Yeah, so we're going to have somebody just speak out, I guess.
Okay.
So do our best to be speaking out if you're not going to speak.
If any members of the public that are physically here would like to comment one at a time, please come up to the podium and speak loudly.
All right, over here.
Oh, thank you.
Madam Chair, will there be a time limit for each speaker as well?
Yes, I don't know what that is. I guess it would depend on how many people plan to speak.
Traditionally,
It's
it's
usually
usually
3
3 minutes,
minutes.
but
Yeah.
just clarifying who's keeping track of that.
Okay. So it'll be a 3-minute limit on public comment.
Good evening. My name is Romolo Marcoccio. I'm a math teacher at Lewiston High School. Some facts first. I'm quoting from the CDC. The best available evidence indicates if children become infected, they're far less likely to suffer severe symptoms. Death rates among school-age children are much lower than among adults. At the same time, the harms attributed to closed school on a social, emotional, behavioral health, economic well-being, and academic achievement of children in both the short and long term are well known and significant. Further, the lack of in-person educational options disproportionately harms low-income and minority children and those living with disabilities. These students are far less likely to have access to private instruction and care, and far more likely to rely on key school supportive resources like food programs, special education services, counseling, and after-school programs to meet basic developmental needs, unquote. We should always ground our decision on available evidence. As of today, science is telling us that it's safer for children to be in school than not to be in school. Schools can save lives. Keeping schools closed will have devastating consequences on the future of our children. Students around the world are returning to school, especially in communities with low transmission rates. Maine's numbers are among the lowest in the country. The situation might change, but right now, reason would not justify a decision not to allow children back. The American Academy of Pediatrics is strongly advocating for a return to school. The majority of families want their children back to school. As an educator, I feel the moral obligation to do what is best for my student and this community. And again, available evidence shows that being in school is what is best for our children. I do have concerns like anybody else. I'm aware of the different personal situations. I'm a parent. All concerns are legitimate, and we should definitely take precautions and make accommodations for those who are not able to be in school at this time. But it is my duty to go back and teach. The children are watching us. We need to restore a sense of trust toward each other, a love toward each other, and compassion toward each other. It will not be a vaccine that will give us our lives back, but the realization that we can find solutions together only if we help, listen, and are kind to each other. Given the current limitation that do not allow students to go back in person full time, this is a reasonable plan. And confident that the district will keep exploring practical avenues to bring students back to school full time as soon as conditions change, I support it. Thank you.
Yes, if you'd like.
So while people are transitioning, I have some emails, so I'll try to insert one, and then when the speaker's ready, we'll go that way. That'd be okay with everyone? So we have a teacher, Michelle Crowley, says, the Lewiston school teacher and parent of 3 children attending Lewiston schools, I strongly urge the committee to adopt the hybrid plan, but delay the start date for students to September 8th. We need to give this plan a chance. Concern from a teacher, Stephen Bello, talking about buildings are not ready to be open now. Classrooms have not been cleaned. Hallways are just being waxed and finished right now, which results in teachers not being able to access their classrooms. Schools have been closed since March. It makes sense that the last 5 or 6 months the schools have been clean and ready to go, except for what has to be done for COVID preparations. How are schools going to be able to keep up with the constant cleaning and safety issues if we're going to go back to school? And I guess my quick response to that, I don't know if we're doing that, just publicly would be, our maintenance staff have had a lot of tasks that maybe don't look like it on paper, and including facilities upgrades and maintenance that we couldn't otherwise do because we would have students in the building. And so I think our facilities team has done a great job, and I think they'll continue to do a great job.
Hi, good evening. My name is Allison Litton. I am the LEA president. I am also a parent of 2 Lewiston Public School children and an educator here in Lewiston. I'd like to start by commending the district staff for the great effort that they've put forth in making this hybrid plan. I think the hybrid plan absolutely has a chance for success once conditions are as such that it is safe and healthy to return to school to do so. We have a joint goal, the LEA, all educators, and the district, in returning to in-person instruction. The speaker that came before me alluded to that, and that's exactly what we want to do. We do have a responsibility, though, to make sure that all students and staff, as well as community members that come in touch with those individuals afterwards, are in a safe and healthy environment. We need to make sure that working conditions for students as well as staff are safe. I would like to just say thank you for the questions that you asked prior to my speaking. These are questions that we share, and of no fault to anyone, we just don't have answers yet. Logistically, there's so much going into this plan and bringing our kids back to us that we really need to make sure that we don't make mistakes in the time from then until now. We can't afford those mistakes. The feasibility, the staff preparedness, those are 2 real concerns of ours. We need time. Superintendent Langlis mentioned the delayed start. LEA is entirely in favor of that. It will allow staff, including our ed techs, to come in and be properly trained. We are responsible for our students once they set foot on those buses and in through our doors. We need to be able to look families in the face and say confidently, your child is safe with us. Not just that we can provide an educational service, but we can provide a safe and healthy educational service. I could go on, but truly, the logistics is the holdup. If we can figure these parts out, and I believe that we can, in collaboration, as we've been doing through the summer, if we can find the answers to these questions, then we're in full support of a hybrid return. We just need to make sure we do it the right way. Thank you.
All right, a question about communication from online from Ellen Hodgkin, who is in EdTech, works at Lewiston Public Schools. Offers up ideas to use messaging to get things out, to partner with community partners to get information out in a timely and culturally appropriate manner. For example, the Somali Bantu Center. Also another thought, to harness contemporary social media more, using a platform like TikTok to reach more students very quickly. It says kids don't use Facebook anymore and are likely to use YouTube for long-form messaging. Those are some ideas that we can consider.
I'm Lori Fowler. I'm a pre-K teacher at Montello. I'm really concerned about the schools being open quickly. I've been socially distancing since March when we were told to go home and not go back. And I see large groups on Facebook, people going out and socializing and not social distancing. So I'm really concerned about going back into a school where I've been out and not been out in amongst people with 100 new teachers and 350 students. And I fault the CDC on this. They're not even mentioning testing whatsoever. We're just taking all these people and putting them back in that building without anybody being tested. It's very concerning to me. I definitely want to be back. I love teaching and I want to be with those kids, but I'm concerned about how we're all just moving forward without even thinking about people going in there that may possibly be carrying it. I'm also a pre-K teacher and I'm really concerned about how I look at some people setting up their classrooms and they look like it's from the 1800s. They've got their desks far apart. Anybody who knows young children, pre-K, kindergarten, it's just not going to work. They're going to see that bright toy over there and they're going to go over and play with that one. So I'm concerned how we're going to operate a pre-K, kindergarten, first grade type program with all the cleaning and the sanitizing that we're being asked to do. And so I really support everything that everybody's doing. I'm on the committee for logistics to get back to Montello. I really want us to get back there, but I really think we need more time to figure this all out and to figure out, the teachers have the time to figure out how their programs are going to work with all the guidelines that we're bringing in. So I support that we work a little bit longer, stay home, children stay home, and the teachers work aggressively to get a top-notch. I think the Lewiston program can do it, get a top-notch program that we can make work as a hybrid or students working remotely.
Thank you.
So Member Queen, something from online, from the LPS comments. Whether we do hybrid or remote school, sports are a must. If it becomes remote, some say if we have no in-school sessions, we should have no sports either, but I argue it's all the more reason to have sports, more in caps. It's working now as we have summer vacation. It can work during the remote and hybrid school year as well. Our children need social interaction and organized physical activity. Want the students to focus, then give them more movement and talking time, get the nerves out, work out the frustrations, and encourage teamwork. And there was a follow-up to this one. This is from Melody Down Click, talking about having organized breaks with physical activity, following the guidelines for students while at school.
Are you responding to that?
No. There's a point of privilege in association with how we're doing these public comments. And just was wondering if we could make folks who are in person aware that if they want to leave after they finish speaking, so that other folks can come into the room, or we can just. I just want people to be aware of that.
Okay.
That's totally an option.
Right. Are we set up that all of the people that are still sitting in here, people from the other room, can come in also to speak? We're still in our...
If somebody wants to bring somebody...
We're waiting on you. You let me know when you're ready, I'll bring them in.
Okay. Is there anyone else in this room that would like to speak?
Yeah.
Yes, yes. But,
I had a question related to that email if possible.
okay.
Is that a district decision or is that an MPA decision for athletics?
So the MPA, in collaboration with the DOE, has issued the guidelines. And I know that all athletics have been following the guidelines. They've had a phase-in plan, and it's to date, and I don't know if Mr. Boyle wants to speak to it, but it's been successful. It hasn't led to any outbreaks or things of that nature. The phase-in plan has very specific protocols that include active screening of students and also testing requirements if students show X amount of symptoms. There's also a lot of rules around it about how they are participating, and it's not. I don't know if you wanted to share more. I see in the back there, but for instance, the basketball players are not screening and rolling off of each other and trying to steal the ball from each other. They're doing handling drills, and they're maintaining distancing as they do their different activities. So mask when appropriate, distancing, all of that. So
Okay, so that's being followed already.
yeah, it's already being followed.
Great. Mr. Fuller, you are pretty sure of that.
My name is Sarah Pamelo. I'm a mom of 3 Lewiston public school students, and I'm also a teacher in the district. And I won't repeat much of what has been said. I am in agreement with the gentleman who shared first. I would like to ditto everything that he stated. And then I just want to encourage us all to trust our district staff that have been working tirelessly throughout the summer. And if they are saying that they are doing the work to make it so we can return in person safely, then I believe we owe it to them to trust them on that. You know, we have PPE, they are saying. We are, as teachers, as you all know, we work every day, even in the best, like pre-COVID situation. We have to flex, we have to do things at a minute's notice in the best interest of students and our coworkers. And so I think we're already a group of people that are able to do that. And then one other thing that I don't know if it's been looked at, but if all remote learning is the path, for me as a teacher, that actually puts me more in a quandary of if I can teach, because I have teenage boys, and 5 days a week on their own, if I'm going to be busy teaching, is a huge concern for me. They're obviously old enough to stay home and be there by themselves, but that's a lot of free time on their hands that is a concern for me as their mom. So the hybrid makes it a little easier for me to access and to handle that as a family. So that's all.
Thank you. While he's reading, you have any more to read?
Yeah.
While he's reading, if anybody else wants to get up and speak, and then if you want to check on people coming in from out there. Thank you.
My message from Kirsten Burgess, who's a staff, who also worked at a camp this summer and supports the idea of using temperature screening. It can be a real challenge at times, but it can also be beneficial. And then having processes in place for students, even perhaps as they get on the bus.
Hi, Keith Levesque. I'm a teacher at the high school, social studies teacher and LEA vice president. I guess a couple comments and a question. First off, I think it's important to notice the difference between requirements, recommendations, and guidelines. So the recommendations that come down from the state, the green, the yellow, the red, those are just that. They're recommendations, and the board is welcome to do something different. But there are health and safety requirements. These are things that we need to be able to meet. We need to be able to prove that our buildings are safe for students and staff to be able to go back. So I just want to make that point. Additionally, Chairwoman Parks asked what we've learned since March as far as how to provide distance learning. And I personally appreciate the focus that the district took in trying to I guess focus on mental and physical health of our staff and our students in the spring. But I can't help but feel like we missed an opportunity to better prepare our staff in the time from March to June, anticipating that we would need to do distance learning this year. I feel we missed an opportunity to provide professional development. There's a lot of staff that are not adequately prepared to go on day one and do it faithfully. So I feel like time that Mr. Langlis is requesting and that Allison has asked has asked for as well, I think is much needed. I guess my question, and I think the board has asked some great questions about health and safety. One thing that hasn't come up is how adequately are we prepared to do contact tracing? I just see it as a nightmare, particularly in the high school and the middle school, where students are transitioning between classes. There's a lot of contacts there, and how prepared are we to do that tracing and do it faithfully? Thank you.
Hi, my name's Bonita Ames. My son goes to Lewiston High School in the FLS program. And my feelings on it is, I don't have a choice but to send him to school because he cannot learn by a computer. They don't have anything set up for them to have the items that they need to be able to learn. He is a tactile learner. He needs to be able to manipulate and work with things to be able to learn. He's already lost half a year. I don't want him to lose more. He wants to go to school so he can see his friends, which is an important part of his IEP because of what he has. But he can't do that because he has to stay 6 feet away from him. So I feel, at least in the high school level, that our special ed kids are not getting what they need at all. And that's my concern. I would rather keep him home and teach him myself with the materials that he needs than to send him back to school at this point. I can't speak for all of them. I explained to him exactly what it's like. He wanted to go to school when he just, okay, you can go to school, you're going to be able to see your friends, you have to follow guidelines. But when the guidelines are explained to him, he doesn't want to be there. He wants to when he doesn't know what it's all about, but now he knows what it's all about, he doesn't want to go. So, and I've talked with the special ed, and from what I've been told, the fall is going to be exactly like it was in the spring, which is he gets to sit on a computer and play games to learn. That's not how children learn. They need to each be at their level to learn the way they learn. And for him, he needs manipulatives. He needs to feel it, move it around, and see how it works. So, my opinion, school committee, hybrid, not hybrid, remote learning for these guys until everything can get into place and they can come back to school and have their learning the way they're supposed to have it. Thank you.
So an email from Janet Bowden, who is a parent in Lewiston. It says, back to school doesn't need to mean back to normal. I think we're all pretty much on the same page with this concept. I want to start by saying that over the last month, our high school athletes have been back to work conditioning and practicing for upcoming sports seasons. Summer sessions have certainly looked and felt different, but they are proof that our children and their coaches can follow a plan and be responsible for their own safety. Slowly, some guidelines have been lifted as our young athletes continue to show maturity and follow the NPA rules. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe we've had a single outbreak of COVID-19 among our students this summer. I don't see why we would expect any different from our children if they're allowed back in school. There's no evidence that keeping our schools closed in Lewiston, Maine will control transmission. New York or Seattle, maybe, but not Lewiston. At some point, we need to take a cautious step forward and at least try. It's clear that COVID-19 isn't going anywhere. The academic, physical, and mental upside associated with reopening outweigh the risk at this point. According to the CDC, more youth are dying of suicide and drug overdoses than COVID-19. The American Academy for Pediatrics says that children should be in classrooms for in-person learning as soon as possible. It feels as though we've wasted months as a nation waiting for a resolution that just isn't going to come. It's up to us locally how we move forward. If the school committee doesn't feel comfortable opening up on August 31st for whatever reason that may be, I'd like to request that the committee pushes back the reopening of LPS by no more than 3 weeks. If you're concerned that the hybrid plan isn't safe enough, a panel should be formed that consists of parents, school committee members, administrators, and most importantly, our teachers who together could come up with a solid plan to reopen. By postponing our start date to mid or end of September, we can also move past the final stretch of summer humidity in our schools are never quite prepared for, especially with the new obstacle of wearing a face mask. Also, please remember that we always seem to have more kids than we can staff at high needs that just can't be met. I'm pretty sure that any teacher in this room can attest to that. That isn't a reason not to open. It's always been a handicap in the LPS.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Young. I'm an educator myself. I'm a spouse of a Lewiston educator. I have 2 children in the Lewiston school system. And I sent an email, the echo, a few days ago outlining my concerns concerning health and well-being, quality of education, school scheduling, and the safety of teachers and family. And I won't recap that, but I did have a few more thoughts. In doing the reading I've been doing concerning how to best cope with this with students, one of the items has been to focus on relationships first. My concern with that, especially with my 9-year-old, is what kind of relationship she's going to form in a classroom with these masks on, with students who don't know each other yet, and a teacher doesn't know them either yet. They can't share materials, certainly. They can't play taste on a playground. They can't catch each other anymore. They also can't see each other smile. They have to treat their friends as if they're going to hurt them. And they can't walk up to their teachers and hug them, which my daughter is famous for. We certainly do have barriers in the way. At least, though, online learning right now offers a real barrier, which means I can't hug you. It's different that way. But at least then they can have education 5 days a week rather than 2. Also, I think one of the things that's missing again and again in the conversation, and I do appreciate being polled as a parent, the issue isn't what I want my student to be or do, it's what is safe for them to do. 85% of parents can want their students back. That's not really the charge, though, of the school system. I do know we're a service. I'm a service at my school district as well. But if you can't do it safely, there's no real service being offered. Thank you.
Message from Julie Raymond, teacher in the district. I'm writing as a Lewiston teacher and Lewiston parent to support the hybrid model presented by the district. Many teachers and parents, such as myself, feel comfortable with the hybrid model and are actually more concerned with a remote-only plan. The hybrid model better allows teachers to build relationships and make connections with students, which is so important right now. Having students in my classroom a couple days a week will allow me to better meet their social emotional needs than if we are just remote. If we begin remote, teachers are trying to get to know their students, build important relationships through a screen. I understand that remote could be required at some point during the school year. By beginning with the hybrid model, if we have to switch to remote, our teachers and students will have built relationships, established expectations, and built the foundation on which the remote learning can spring from. It will begin with remote, and when it is not required, we would take away valuable classroom experiences. As a parent, I believe my children, like many, will do better academically and social emotionally having 2 days in person. They will be more connected to their learning by having time with their teachers in person, not just through video remote lessons. Thank you for your time.
Hi, I'm Andrea Peterson. I have 2 boys attend school here. One does have special needs and does get the extra stuff, like the speech and stuff like that, which he did not get the last 6 months, part of the year. And we've lost a lot of that gain we were making with that. Noting that there was a lot of the online stuff that came out for helping, a lot of glitches in that with the computers and trying to get them to work and getting connected really didn't work out very well. But I have 2 questions. Parents were only giving 2 options on that survey. 1, remote or hybrid. There was no option to see who wanted to do which. My question is, why is it 2 days it's okay to come to the building and the other 2 days not? Why Why is that okay? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays was hard enough with the half days trying to book it out of work or whatever, but not having it, doing that extra cleaning, and then the next 2 days remote learning. Why can't it just be the same as Monday and Tuesday? Second, parents with daycares outside of the area with no internet access for those other 2 days, will they be penalized for not being able to go on to do that remote learning, and they only get that Monday, Tuesday? That's all I have.
So some of the thinking behind the split week is just to control the amount of students in the building. And so that's why you end with Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Because it's different populations of students in the building at those respective windows of time. And then as for the connectivity concern, it's a real challenge. We know that being remote is part of the week or all of the week going to be a challenge. And one of the things we do have, and that plan is still coming together, but it's real close. Mr. Terry and his tech department have remote devices that will provide internet for those who need to have those access points. So that will assist. Again, I know it's not perfect, but those wireless devices will at least provide the access point.
Thank you. Thank you.
A comment from Anita Miles, who works with Lewiston Public Schools and students. I hear that children might not have severe case of COVID, but what is their transmission rate? Will they bring it home to parents and grandparents?
I'm Allison Avery. I'm the secretary for the LEA, and I'm also the computer science teacher at the middle school. My biggest concerns right now is not the hybrid model. We as LEA are supportive of this. I think it's a very well worked out plan. I think logistically we just don't have time to start this in 2 weeks. I think that teachers need a lot more training. Clearly by the fall, the spring situation, we did not do our best teaching because we didn't know how. These extra time before school starts will allow teachers to develop these online resources to make it so that if and when we have to go for fully virtual, that plan's already set up. It's going to be seamless. I understand that parents want their students in school. Teachers, I guarantee you, want it more than them. We miss our kids. We love our kids. Once we have a student in our class, they are forever our children. We care about them so much, and we just want to make sure that this experience for them is not detrimental. We don't want to go into a situation where we're hybrid at first, and then we have to go virtual, and we have no plan for that. There's just too many logistical things right now that I think we just need a little bit more time to iron out before they're completely ready. I 100% agree with Superintendent Langlis. If we are able to give that PD, to give that time to teachers to adequately plan for this, there is a really high probability of this working, and we can do this. But we just need more time. And also, my other biggest concern is, what do we do as a district when somebody tests positive for COVID? We know it's going to happen. The rate of transmission with children is 4 out of 1,000 kids will die. Are we willing to risk 20 children in our district to go back too soon? I am a parent of a child that I had to bury. I had to make a decision to pull him off life support, and I do not want any of our families to face that decision. And I think that we need to be adequately prepared to deal with that when it does happen, so our parents, our community, does not have to make that decision. That's...
Hi, I'm Cheryl Wood. I don't have any children in the school system. I do pay taxes, though. And I just thought a proposal to come across would be, why don't the school system have lawyers draft a waiver stating that if any child contacts or any adult gets COVID from going to school, that they would not be liable for that. You could open up the schools, kids could be in schools, kids that don't, if you have children that don't want, the parents don't want them in school, have the teachers that don't want to teach in the school system do the remote control learning. That's just what I had to say. And also, if we can't open the schools up, are we going to refund some of these parents the money that is charged for them to send their kids to school? Thank you.
Quick email from Lisa Chansky, who is the staff of the public schools. I believe the choices, although it is not 100%, it is not safe.
We good? All right. My name is Craig Bouchard. I live at 3 Isabel Lane here in Lewiston. I would encourage you to bring back the children back to school. While you contemplate how to move forward, let's not forget some of the facts. This virus has a 99% survival rate. Daycares have been open for 5+ months in the state of Maine without a single outbreak. We cannot hide from this virus forever. We already tried that for 3 months and it didn't work. So what we're really talking about is how do we reduce our risk, right? So let me give you a few things. I would offer that we give parents 4 choices, all virtual, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday or Friday like you've offered. Also, 4-day in-school option for all students, not just special program students. By doing this, you'll reduce your risk down to 1/4, but I'll give you 50% due to the 2-day option mixing with the 4-day kids. Let's not forget enrollment will be down this year for those who have chosen not to play this game of wait and see and have enrolled in private school or homeschooling or other districts that will be having in-school education. Further, the economic inequalities you were all concerned with months ago will be exacerbated by choosing all virtual learning. Having all kids and teachers wear masks, washing hands, use of hand sanitizer all further reduce your risk. Let's not forget, we're talking about symptom-free exposure here. I also heard concerns about ventilation, and if the school has proper ventilation, and then concerns about the use of fans and whether this is truly an option. It seems kind of hypocritical to say we don't have a use of ventilation, but then when a solution or resolution is offered, fans are not now okay. Let's not forget the fact that the CDC has said that you can be in the same room within 6 feet of a person with symptoms for 10 to 30 minutes and still not get the virus. Again, we're talking about healthy kids that are symptom-free. I read the concerns of the teachers would not be able to get close to the children. This is a false statement. While wearing masks, each individual wearing masks, you can get much closer than 6 feet. I hear statements about teachers being concerned about not being able to get within 6 feet and how the negative impacts that it will have on the students. What do you think totally virtual learning will do to them? It's going to have a greater negative impact. So please, I encourage you to resume classes with the previously stated options and stop hiding behind the cloak of we're trying to do it safe for our children. Thank you.
A couple of things that have come up, I just grabbed notes of. The contact tracing that came up a couple of people ago is not something that is a function of Lewiston Public Schools. It is a function of the CDC, the Maine CDC. Of course, we do have schedules for students, so we know where in buildings they were if the need for tracing should arise. We did ask this question of the state, and that was their answer. The CDC was in charge of contact tracing, not local school districts. Also, just as a quick note, because I feel like I've heard it just a couple of times, to make sure people are aware that the 6 feet between teachers and students has nothing to do with what the teachers wish to do. It has everything to do with the guidelines that are required by the state of Maine. So I don't want this to be painted as teachers feel like they can't do certain things. It's about the state guidelines that require them not to, most of them.
My name is Lakota Physic. I live in Lewiston, and I have 2 children that attend the schools here. As I was listening to all the comments today, one thing that I listened to logistics-wise, 70% of the parents said they wanted their kids to be in school. When we factor in the ones that didn't respond, it looks like 80%. We already know that 17% of the staff have medical concerns with their family or themselves. So that matches up to 20% of kids will be at home and 17% of staff will match that, which seems doable, but it could easily turn into a shortage. So I would urge any parents that are listening to this to really consider needs over wants. If you really do not need your child to be at school, if you're home, working at home, I'd consider shifting to the fully at home if you're available so that we can make those numbers match up better. And on a different note, Acadia Academy started last year, I believe on September 9th. They did this by front-loading their professional development, and I believe this is something we could do also. We could use the time between now, when we would usually start, and say September 8th, to front-load professional development to prepare our teachers, develop and practice new procedures that are necessary for education during COVID. This would also bring us past the tourist season and past the arrival of students, which will likely spike our numbers and might shift our protocols. It would also bring us past the hottest days of summer. I used to work at Montello. Second floor is unbearable. We'd bring our students out because we couldn't breathe in normal conditions. I would really be concerned wearing masks in those days. I also heard Ms. Fowler bring up a concern that a lot of us have been social distancing, a lot of us haven't. We're going to be mixing those populations. The state ruled that anyone coming from out of state had to have a negative test. We require vaccines for our students. Is it an option to require students and staff to have evidence of a negative test before returning? I don't know if it is, but maybe that would be some kind of reassurance that would keep our numbers down. Finally, I would like to say thank you for all your consideration. This is not an easy decision. There's no perfect answer. Whatever you decide is going to have an impact on families and teachers. And it's going to leave a lot of people scrambling. So even if it's not the decision that's going to please the most people, I urge you to make the decision now so that families, teachers can plan and make the best of this situation. Thank you.
That was exactly right to 0 seconds on my timer. Perfect.
An email from Tanya Bailey Curry, who is a resident, is a parent of 2 children and a grandparent of 2 children who attend elementary school in Lewiston. Completing the survey prior to this meeting was challenging because it's difficult simply to imagine what remote learning will look like. We didn't have a plan in March and schools rallied and did the best they could, but it was subpar to say the least. No blame intended here, but how are parents supposed to be reassured that remote learning will meet the needs of our kids without having an example? Lastly, the safety of our kids and teachers and staff is the most important. Will teachers and staff be required to have testing regularly? I guess just to put out to them, there's nothing in the guidelines currently that say that teachers have to have testing regularly. But as a side note, we had a professional development training coming up for administrators, and the person could not facilitate a test before they arrived in the state of Maine, and we have postponed that training. And so we are following the guidelines and maintaining them.
Good evening. I'm Sheila Roy. I live at 241 Grove Street. I am currently the mother of a senior, class of 2021 at Lewiston High School, and her friend. So Sid is currently valedictorian of her senior class. Katie Morin is the class president. We're here to speak in favor of the hybrid model. I guess what really brought me here tonight is hearing that decisions were already made to go all online. And as a parent and as a nurse, I do not work in the hospital. I do work for a private industry manufacturing company that I haven't had the opportunity to stop. I have been an essential worker and have not had time to put things into place. We have had bumps in the road, but we work through those every day. I can tell you, getting up those early mornings in March and driving to work not knowing what I was coming into was scary. And a lot of people's anger, fear is based out of that worry, right? We are scared and it's not going away, you know? So you ask how many people are gonna get sick, how many people are gonna die. Nobody can answer that. And I would say if you don't start now, Maine has the lowest positivity rating along with Vermont. If we don't start now, when do you start? Okay, I'm talking to people, not everybody, I mean, you have people that will not take the vaccine. So you can't say, well, when the vaccine comes out, that we'll open up schools again, because people are gonna choose not to get the vaccine. I think we're fortunate in the city of Lewiston that we have a rapid analyzer that's currently at B Street that was brought in a few months ago. So I would encourage the school department to work with the school-based health center to see if there's ways that the city can work with them in order to, if somebody does get ill, I've had people ill at the site. We had to go through universal testing. You want to talk about stress? But we made it through, you know, it was a stressful time, but we learned and we put things, you know, processes in place, and we had processes in place. And it doesn't prevent people from getting sick. But if we have the testing available, that acknowledges whether they have COVID or not. And then you do your contact tracing, working with the CDC, and you know that really minimizes the fear and you know allows people to move on with their life, because this isn't going away. And so if we choose not to move forward now, when do we move forward? And I think the girls just want to say something.
I just want to say thank you for all your concerns and working with everyone in the school system, staff, students, teachers, even coaches, because I know, like, I play soccer right now, and we're doing all the safety protocols, proper PPE, and everything just to stay safe. I know that me, Katie, even a ton of other seniors, we're really looking forward to our senior year, and we're kind of saddened that we might not be able to have prom or other things that past seniors have been able to have. And for me personally, I'm a in-person student. I learn well in person rather than online. Just, you know, like I have a 99.1 GPA. It's just, like, as you can tell, like, I do way better in person than online. I know I've been taking an online class and I haven't been doing as well just because I haven't been able to talk to a teacher in person and been able to get the responses that I needed from the question, like from my questions that I've asked. And I know that a lot of students will be messaging teachers if we're online, and you'll have to wait probably a couple hours just for one problem instead of being able to move forward. Yeah, it's just going to be a difficult situation for us, and I know it'll be a difficult situation for you guys, but I hope you look forward to doing the hybrid learning for us. Thank you.
I think that Sydney hit it right on the head, and my GPA isn't as high as hers, but I took a summer college class and it was all online, and I almost failed it. And I learned a lot about my learning style, and I learned that I need to be in school, whether it's 2 days a week. I think that it's really scary to see what numbers are gonna come out of our senior class this year if we go all online. And I'm worried to see what's gonna happen to us. And like Sid said, looking forward to our senior year. this is the last year we're going to have with all of our friends, and it's going to be nice to at least be with them 2 days a week, and it's hard to communicate over Zoom, and it's hard for us to all be together. So I hope you guys consider the hybrid learning, and thank you for all that you're doing.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Oh, sorry.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Williams, 119 Dow Avenue. I have a 6th grader at Montello and a senior who's also in the LRTC program. There's obviously a lot of focus on our kids' physical health and well-being, but we can't lose track of their social and emotional and mental health and well-being in all of this as well. And I think Sydney and Katie just kind of nailed it, that kids from pre-K up through the high school seniors need that in-person connection with their teachers. Even 2 days a week, it's going to look different. School is not looking the same anymore than it had been. But I really believe they need those couple days a week, make the connections, develop the relationships. I think for my 2 children in particular, it will make the days that they're working from home remotely that much easier for them. They'll know what they're doing. They'll have had time to talk to the teacher. They'll know the following week. They can if they have more questions. No plan is foolproof. Yes, there are risks. There are concerns. I think the plan that has been developed has really focused on the concerns. Kudos to everyone who has been involved with working on this, because I'm sure it hasn't been easy. I'm sure you've all had sleepless nights over it. But I think it's really looking at what we need. I believe I heard something mentioned earlier that maybe there might be a need to delay the start of school by another week or so to allow a little bit more time. I personally would much rather see that than a strictly remote option right from the get-go. I think if we start remote, it's going to be that much harder for all the students. Thank you.
Email from Marcus Tallarico. In a joint report of the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Children's Hospital Association released recently, the rate of COVID-19 cases among children in the U.S. raised by 40% for 100,000 cases in just the last 2 weeks of July, bringing the total number of pediatric COVID cases in the U.S. to nearly 340,000 pediatric cases. I believe the LPS should take the remote approach with a delayed start. These are scary times. No one has all the answers, but please continue to look at the facts and the information and data that we continue to learn every day from folks who are educated professionals in these medical and science fields. There's a lot of misinformation going around, and it's extremely dangerous. Tracy Miller. I live in Lewiston and have 2 children at LHS. Both of my kids would like to take advantage of the hybrid model, and we responded to the district's recent surveys as such. However, the extensive challenges described at tonight's meeting make me wonder about the ability of the district to prepare fully for a safe return in a timely way. How confident are you, the administration specifically, that the hybrid model can work right now? Do we need more time, more than just 1 extra week to plan for staffing, busing, classroom spaces, etc.? From A.B. Burley, I'm an LPS teacher and mom of 2 LPS students. I just wanted to say that I feel strongly that we should give hybrid learning a try. My 2 children have both shared that they want to go back and feel that they can learn better in person. I know some are reluctant to send their children back, but I would point them toward the remote option if they are concerned about the safety. I would really encourage you to try the hybrid option to allow those who need to be in person to go in person to learn. This fall I'm teaching kindergarten. Can you imagine teaching 5-year-olds entirely online? So much of their learning needs to be in person with showing how to write names, write letters, etc. Please think about letting us try to go back part-time. From Heidi Lampert. I'm in favor of the hybrid model. We have 2 students in the neighborhood, at the high school, and they absolutely need the security of some face time. I have worked for the safety committee for McMahon, and that the teachers are up to the task for making this work. Who knows what will happen during the course of flu season? We need to get the students into a routine with supportive teachers. If we have to go to a full remote at some point, it will be a successful experience for all students. Having said that, I support pushing the start date back for students so that we are fully prepared to navigate whatever comes our way this year. Sarah Shannon, just wondering if everyone on the committee is aware that there are a lot of kids actively playing sports through AAU and rec programs, for example, full contact basketball games since June, and we haven't had an outbreak. Why can't they go to school for a few hours and they can play basketball all day or other sports as they have all summer? And I think this is the last one. How will previously recorded lessons on remote days be differentiated? How will one lesson meet all levels? How will that be monitored? I think those are excellent questions. I think that's why we looked at our curriculum department, looking at using platforms that are more applicable to things like differentiated instruction, and having a common platform so that parents and students learn to navigate those that have some routine and commonality. And Assistant Superintendent, do you want to add to that?
No.
All right,
That's
it
everything?
for now, yeah.
Yes.
10 minutes.
Break? Yes. We'll take a 10-minute break.